Grand Theft Auto.
All the people in here are working on what DMA hopes will be its new blockbuster. It's a game called Grand Theft Auto.
Violent games can cause kids to act more aggressively and accept violence as a part of everyday life.
You are learning in a virtual reality to be violent, to enjoy being violent, how to kill.
We must stop the glorification of violence in our society. This includes the gruesome and grisly video games that are now commonplace.
Deadly, corrupting, and demeaning. Just a few ways the iconic and ever-controversial Grand Theft Auto series has been described over the years. Since its inception in 1997, the goal was always to push boundaries and buttons, and as the years and sequels rolled by, the world-conquering franchise's secretive developer Rockstar Games have repeatedly found themselves in hot water with parents, politicians, and entire governments. However, despite multiple self-imposed hurdles along the way, the GTA series is one of the most lucrative in all of gaming, with a net revenue of over $8 billion and counting, and considering the near-global levels of hype that await the upcoming release of Grand Theft Auto 6, it doesn't look like that momentum shows any signs of slowing, apart from when Take-Two cut 5% of their staff in April 2024, leaving over 600 people jobless. For God's sake. Sad state of the games industry aside, there's no denying that Grand Theft Auto is a video game titan, but if you'd have asked the original game's developers what future they saw for the series back when it was in its early stages in the mid-90s, we doubt the picture they painted would be anything like reality. Most of them didn't even think it would make it out of the door. So how did Grand Theft Auto go from a simple top-down cops and robbers title that no one wanted to play to being one of the most successful video game franchises on the planet, spawning one of the biggest game companies ever in the process? Well, I think it's about time we found out, don't you? I'm Ben from TripleJump, and this is Grand Theft Auto 6 and the untold story of Rockstar Games. These days, if you utter the word Rockstar, you'll likely get one of two responses. If you say it to a layperson, they'll probably start harping on about the likes of Kiss, Iron Maiden, or Black Sabbath. But say it to anyone who regularly plays video games, and it's likely their minds will go to titles like Manhunt, Red Dead Redemption, and, of course, Grand Theft Auto. There are many key players in the story of Rockstar's formation, but the frontman, or rockstar, if you will, is undeniably Sam Houser. Born in 1971 to actress Geraldine Moffat, who fans of old movies will undoubtedly recognize from cult hit Get Carter, and solicitor Walter Hauser, Sam was raised on gangster flicks and video games. A rebel from a young age, insisting on wearing Doc Martens in place of his public school-approved footwear, he fell in love with Def Jam Records, the label responsible for the success of the likes of the Beastie Boys and LL Cool J, and by extension, New York City, desiring nothing more than to one day revolutionize pop culture as Def Jam had. For his 18th birthday, Sam's father took him on a trip to New York, the city he had become so enamored with, and once there, he immediately began immersing himself in the culture, purchasing a leather jacket and a pair of Air Jordans, just like the ones he'd seen his favorite musicians wearing on MTV. Whilst on the trip, he and his father met with Heinz Henn, a friend of Walter's and a marketing executive for music label BMG. Henn spent much of the lunch complaining that the label was failing to reach the youth, to which Sam responded, "Why is everyone in the record business so old?" Presumably taken aback by the candid question, Henn told Walter that his son was a lunatic, but one with some good ideas, and thus, Sam Houser had his first job. He started out interning in the mailroom at BMG's offices on Fulham High Street in London, though his renegade attitude meant that he didn't stay there for long. He produced music videos for the label, including one for Take That's single Take That and Party, and whilst Robbie, Gary, Mark, Howard and Jason's antics were a far cry from the gangster movies and hip-hop on which he was raised, Sam was just pleased to finally be in the industry. He made waves at the company by suggesting that Annie Lennox's Diva album be promoted online rather than by the more traditional methods of the early 90s, and though this was met with some skepticism, BMG's execs were laughing on the other side of their faces when Sam's scheme got the album to #1 in the UK charts. Soon after, BMG began their foray into the world of video games, a medium very close to Sam's heart, and he just knew that he had to get a slice of that particular pixelated pie. He begged BMG for a chance, telling them, "I want to get involved. I'm not involved, but there's a lot of things I can bring into this situation." His bolshiness paid off, and once he was done with university, Sam was transferred to BMG's interactive publishing division. Now all he needed was something to publish. Hundreds of miles physically and a million miles metaphorically from Sam Houser's privileged upbringing was David Jones. Being a somewhat gawky, red-headed nerd growing up in Douglas, a particularly rough part of Dundee, Scotland, was not easy for David Jones. From a young age, the boy had fallen in love with video games, often stopping by his local chippy or greeting card shop to play Galaga or Space Invaders. His passion for topping scoreboards even earned him a sound beating one day when he unwittingly landed the #1 spot on a machine on the turf of a particularly unsavoury teen gang. This didn't put him off the medium, however, but it did ensure he stuck to cabinets in his own part of town from then on. Though Douglas was rather deprived, the secondary school was one of the first in the UK to offer computer studies lessons, which Jones immediately took to. He taught himself how to program and build computers, and when he left school he got an apprenticeship in the local Timex plant as an engineer, meeting with his friends at the Kingsway Amateur Computer Club in his spare time. It was here that he began making video games. His time with Timex was, somewhat ironically, cut short, and Jones was offered £3,000, a reasonable chunk of change at the time, to take redundancy when the proverbial plops started hitting the fan for the company. Instead of saving it, however, Jones bought himself a state-of-the-art Amiga 1000 computer and threw himself into designing video games. Everyone thought he was nuts, telling him that he was never going to be able to sell enough video games to make a living, but he kept going anyway, and in 1988 he released Menace, a side-scrolling shooter for the Amiga that made him the best part of £20,000. He left university before graduating from his software engineering course and founded DMA Design, soon bringing in his friends Russell Kay, Steve Hammond and Mike Daly, whom he knew from the computer club. The studio itself was, admittedly, a bit of a madhouse. The ragtag group spent their days programming games and their evenings frequenting the local pubs. At one point, the office got into such a state that Jones's wife begged them to let her come and clean the toilet. Still, you don't need a fresh lab to make stellar games, it would seem, and in 1989 the studio released Blood Money, a side-scrolling shooter published by Psygnosis that the studio called the ultimate arcade game. They might not have been entirely on the money there, but Blood Money did shift over 30,000 copies in 2 months, which was quite the achievement for the burgeoning studio. DMA Design's next project came about after one of the programmers discovered a way to make dozens of characters appear on screen all at once, demoing the technology to his colleagues by animating a line of small creatures being led to their deaths. A little injection of dark Scottish humour later, and Lemmings was born. Released on Valentine's Day 1991, the game was an instant hit, earning DMA more than £1.5 million, which meant one thing, and one thing only. Jones could buy himself a Ferrari. Perhaps more importantly, however, big names in the industry started taking notice, namely Nintendo. Suddenly, this slightly stinky office full of sweary Scottish coders was paying host to one Shigeru Miyamoto, and DMA were in partnership with the gaming giant. Until they developed Body Harvest, a game that was too risque for the family-friendly brand, and were quickly dropped again. With Nintendo firmly in their rearview mirror, DMA needed a new project, and so Jones set his team to work coming up with ideas for a virtual world. Mike Daly created a top-down cityscape, then another coder populated it with dinosaurs running rampant before this idea was scrapped in favour of something a bit more realistic: cars. The studio immediately got to work on a cops and robbers style game in which players took on the role of law enforcement and were charged with apprehending criminals. They called it Race and Chase, and as soon as the demo was ready, they took it to publisher BMG Interactive, who were very keen to work with Jones, and the Scot walked away from the meeting with a deal to deliver 4 games over 13 months. Sam Houser finally had his game, and he and his colleagues were eager to boot up DMA's demo. Slight problem though, it was a bit, shit. Though some at DMA were rather proud of Race and Chase, an admittedly technically sound offering, most who played it were bored by it. Nobody wanted to be an officer of the law, obeying traffic lights and catching criminals. This was a video game. Players wanted to do something, fun. Unfortunately, the fun things you could do in the game, like speeding around and committing hit and runs, were punished, but thankfully DMA were quick to realise where they'd gone wrong, and they got to work on turning things around. They sent a new build of the game to Sam and the gang at BMG a short time later, and though everything looked very similar, they soon found that the whole thing had been overhauled. Now, when the protagonist approached a car to get in it, a tiny pixelated person was flung from it. Running red lights was no longer punished, and hitting pedestrians resulted in a satisfying splat and a little 100 popping up on the screen, signifying a reward for the player's violent behaviour.
Sam loved it. This wasn't like other games. You weren't a noble elf tasked with vanquishing evil, a knight out to slay a dragon, or a portly plumber looking to rescue a princess. You were the baddie, and Sam, who wanted to make video games more rebellious, was enraptured, and DMA had the thumbs up to proceed along their newly established trajectory.
You might think that, with the studio being several years old, DMA might have grown up somewhat, gotten into the groove of development, and at the very least sorted out their personal hygiene problems, but you would be wrong. The office was chaos. The developers were practically given free rein to put whatever they wanted in the game, which was admittedly backed up wholeheartedly by Sam. A band played almost constantly, churning out songs for the game, something which was almost unheard of in the time of chiptune soundtracks, and the place got so smelly that one particularly pungent dev had his desk plastered in air fresheners. Still, regardless of the zoo that was DMA Design's headquarters, they continued to push forwards with Race and Chase. The cities featured in the game were modelled on real-life American cities in order to appeal to as broad of an audience as possible. The linearity of the missions was stripped out, meaning that players could do the quests as and when they fancied, or even not at all, and the wanted system was introduced to add some stakes to the title. Bit by bit, the name Race and Chase fit the game less and less, especially by the point that players were mowing down Harry Kushner's, which was apparently inspired by Brian Baglow, writer and designer at DMA, and his hatred for those who held him up at the airport. So, a new moniker was needed, something that fit the criminal spirit of the game and would tell players straight away what they were letting themselves in for. Personally, I think Grand Theft Auto was right on the money. Sam Houser might have been in love with Grand Theft Auto, partly due to the fact that it was a great deal more grown-up than the fantasy-based fare that was popular at the time, but it's fair to say that the same couldn't be said of the bigwigs at BMG. The biggest title of the time was undeniably Tomb Raider, a slick, swashbuckling, action-packed adventure with crisp graphics and a wildly popular heroine whose likeness adorned the bedroom walls of many a teenage fan. Definitely because of her archaeology chops and for no other reason at all.
Grand Theft Auto, however, couldn't have been less like Tomb Raider if it had tried. It looked like a game released a decade prior, it had no sexy protagonist, and as such, BMG's higher-ups weren't interested.
Gary Penn, senior producer at BMG, said of the fiasco, they were trying to kill it every flipping month. As a result, every time Sam and co wound up on a conference call with the higher-ups, they were forced to fight for Grand Theft Auto like there was no tomorrow. It wasn't just a lack of shiny graphics that were causing the execs to furrow their brows at Grand Theft Auto, though. Its development wasn't going swimmingly either. Deadlines were constantly being missed, the freedom given to the studio resulted in a certain lack of cohesion as the writers took the game in one direction whilst the programmers pulled it in another, and whilst Race and Chase had been technically competent, Grand Theft Auto was a bit of a dumpster fire.
Fortunately, Penn was sent in to sort out the whole sorry mess, something that he described as being like trying to nail jelly to kittens. Horrible analogy, but he was able to whip the studio into shape enough to bring together a cohesive product, all whilst helping to keep BMG's executives satisfied.
Getting the game out of the door was one thing, but getting the gaming public on side was quite another, because it wasn't just corporate types who were impressed by fancy graphics and eye-candy protagonists, gamers were too. The game needed hype, it needed the public's attention, it needed a hamster? On the 13th of March 1986, British newspaper The Sun, yes, newspaper is in very heavy quotation marks here, ran a headline that read, "Freddie Starr ate my hamster," and alleged that the stand-up comedian, while staying at the home of a friend, had asked said friend's girlfriend to make him a sandwich and when she refused, placed her pet hamster between 2 slices of bread and eaten it. Naturally, this was entirely made up and was in fact a practical joke pulled by Starr's agent, publicist Max Clifford. Bizarre and gross as the headline was, though, it gave a huge boost to Starr's career, and suddenly tickets for his live tour were selling out and his appearance fee had been boosted by nearly £1 million. Looking for a way to get Grand Theft Auto into the headlines, Gary Dale, president of BMG's interactive software and video division, put in a call to Max Clifford Associates to see if they could do something. Dale was keen to put out a carefully managed message, however Clifford urged him and BMG to throw caution to the wind and really play up the game's themes of violence by making the whole thing seem repugnant to the elite. This would be their hamster. Sam Houser thought the plan was absolutely brilliant, but others, including David Jones, weren't convinced. Not only did he not want to sell the game on controversy alone, but DMA were also looking to merge with Gremlin Interactive at the time, and Jones was keen not to do anything that could put that in jeopardy.
The plan went ahead despite Jones's hesitance, with Clifford whispering in all the right ears that Grand Theft Auto was an affront to common decency and that they should be outraged and speak publicly against this outrageous game.
And it worked. Before long, Grand Theft Auto was dominating headlines. The Daily Mail warned its readers of this video nasty that glorified hit-and-run thugs and put players in the role of an up-and-coming low-life car thief. Word of the game even made it to the House of Lords, where Lord Campbell of Croy called upon the BBFC to carefully examine the game and determine whether it should even be legal to sell it. Though initially skeptical of Clifford's involvement, DMA, along with BMG, began happily surfing the waves of controversy. They launched a radio ad campaign containing excerpts from the House of Lords discussion, put parking tickets on fancy cars telling their drivers that the penalty for ownership was having them nicked, and printing lists of crimes on promotional posters. Even writer Brian Baglow found his name splashed across tabloids after Clifford told the press he'd been banned from driving after wrapping his Ford Fiesta RX2 around a tree. Baglow had indeed had a brush with the tree, however it had neither severely damaged his car nor resulted in a driving ban. Luckily he saw the funny side and laughed the whole thing off. So did these efforts pay off? In short, yes. Grand Theft Auto shifted around 10,000 copies per week and before long had brought in around £25 million in revenue. The critics were, admittedly, somewhat divided, and though some saw past the slightly low-tech graphics and were able to appreciate the gameplay, others took issue with the looks of the game, plus the fact that it did have some technical problems. What they thought didn't really matter in the end though, because Grand Theft Auto was a hit with the gaming public, and that's what really counted. Sam Houser was over the moon. He and his team's faith in Grand Theft Auto had paid off and not only paved the way for a sequel but emboldened him to push the envelope even further. Def Jam had changed the music industry, perhaps now he could do the same for the games industry.
Oh, and before you go away from this thinking that Max Clifford was a hero, we feel it's our duty as good citizens to inform you that whilst, yes, GTA probably wouldn't have been anywhere near as successful as it was without him, he was convicted in 2014 of 8 counts of indecent assault on girls between the ages of 15 and 19 and subsequently died in prison. He was, we don't think it's unfair to say, a complete and utter scumbag, and we wouldn't want you to think that we in any way celebrate him as an individual.
Following the release of Grand Theft Auto, it seemed like the world was Sam Houser's oyster. After all, he'd played a massive part in taking a game that was falling apart at the seams and turning it into something magnificent, so it should have followed that the only way was up.
He was barely out of the Grand Theft Auto honeymoon period though before the rug was pulled from under him. BMG Interactive was hemorrhaging money left, right and centre, and to make things worse, the division's German overlords were rather sick and tired of video games.
Facing the boot, Sam started to panic and began approaching other video game publishers in search of a job. Despite his success with GTA, however, no one wanted him. He was considered too much of a loose cannon for the more corporate publishers to take a chance on, too much of a renegade to fit in anywhere else. They didn't want nutters like us, he said, reflecting on the experience. Most people didn't want nutters like him, but Ryan Brandt was not most people. The two had similar childhoods. Brant's father owned magazines in that he owned businesses that produced them, not a couple of issues of Cosmo, and collected art, and his stepmother was a supermodel, which meant that, like Sam, he was constantly immersed in pop culture. Also like Sam, Brant was desperate to shake up the games industry, but rather than insulting his way into an internship, he got a $1.5 million investment from his dad and others and founded Take-Two Interactive in 1993. Take-Two didn't do things like other game companies. Brant was convinced that CD-ROMs populated by Hollywood stars were the way forward, and this was reflected in the company's earliest games. The publisher's second ever game, Hell, a cyberpunk thriller, starred Dennis Hopper and Grace Jones, and their 1996 point-and-click adventure Ripper featured Paul Giamatti, Karen Allen, and none other than Christopher Walken.
This bold strategy seemed to pay off, as by 1997 Take-Two was bringing in more than $200 million in revenue, but Brant knew that in order to stay relevant and compete with the likes of EA, the company needed to keep growing. He began buying up distributors all over the world, and it wasn't long before his attention turned to BMG Interactive. Sam was immediately impressed by Brant's renegade attitude towards creating video games and gave an impassioned speech about what the future might look like for Take-Two if he brought Sam into the fold.
It worked, and Brant paid $14.2 million for BMG, which gave him the rights to Grand Theft Auto, and Sam was promoted to Vice President of Worldwide Product Development at Take-Two. He was bound for New York City, ready to take on the world, and he wasn't going alone, inviting his BMG colleagues Jamie King, Terry Donovan, and Gary Foreman, as well as his brother Dan, along for the ride. Sam, Jamie, Terry, and Gary, along with Sam's 3 cats, moved into a ground-floor apartment in Manhattan that they referred to as the Commune, and it's here that they formulated their plan. They recognized that they needed their own identity. After all, they didn't want to make games that other studios were making, they wanted to make proper adult games for proper adults with jobs and cars and partners, and that meant having their own label. They initially thought to call themselves Grudge Games, a name favored by Donovan, which had been suggested on account of the fact that Sam referred to the group as world-class grudge bearers. Brant wasn't keen though, and felt the moniker might be a bit too negative, urging them to come up with something else. It was Sam himself who suggested Rockstar. I like everything from the Keith Richards it evokes to the campness it evokes and everything in between. At the end of the day, you can't flip with Keith Richards. I mean, I certainly wouldn't want to.
To celebrate their new endeavour, the gents went on a trip to amusement park Six Flags, and whilst there they found a chap who, for a few dollars, would burn messages into wooden plaques. They bought 2, the first carrying the name that they had picked out for their new venture, and the second something to hang next to it to remind them of their mission statement, a message to anyone who might try and tear them down, or try to stop them.
We can't say exactly what it said because we don't want to get demonetized, but let's just say it rhymed with duck off punts. Yeah, you should be safe with that. So, they had a brand and a spunky can-do attitude. Now all Rockstar needed was some games, and oh boy was the pressure on to deliver. You see, when you make big, bold claims about being an elite brand, you actually have to back it up with something, otherwise people will laugh at you. By 1999, Grand Theft Auto had sold more than 1 million copies, making it successful enough to warrant sequels. They started with London 1969, an expansion for Grand Theft Auto developed by Alternative Reality Technologies, now Rockstar Canada, which was inspired by gangster movies like Get Carter, in which, lest we forget, Sam's own mother had starred. Naturally, Sam went about promoting it in his own signature way, enthusing to journalists about things like the fact that the game contained both male and female prostitution. Progressive.
Like its predecessor, it got a mixed reception from critics. Technically, London 1969 was a bit wonky, but its portrayal of London's seedy underbelly circa the late 60s won it some fans, and generally, it was thought to be rather fun.
At the same time, the devs back at DMA were hard at work on Grand Theft Auto 2. It was like the first game in a lot of ways, but the key difference was the introduction of the gangs mechanic, which Sam was incredibly excited about. In GTA, players were given missions by faceless, personality-less, disembodied voices on the end of a telephone, but in GTA 2, they were able to serve gangs, gaining respect or notoriety with each depending on their actions. The gangs weren't the only thing that was new in the world of Grand Theft Auto. Rockstar's new overlords Take-Two, whilst happy to let Sam and co run with certain things, demanded a level of professionalism that hadn't been present during the development of the first game. They wanted to know silly things like how long the game would take to develop and how much it would cost, and made unreasonable requests like, please make sure the game releases when you say it will. Unbelievable. As such, DMA ended up having to develop GTA 2 in just 12 months with a budget of only $1 million, which even at the time wasn't a huge chunk of change for creating a video game. With such tight timeframes in play, the 35-person development team ended up working 6-day weeks. Naturally, tensions began to rise between DMA and Rockstar, the latter of whom didn't help matters with their attitude towards the former, treating the Scots like they were just some backwater studio rather than the true architects of Rockstar's success.
David Jones wasn't happy either. Although Rockstar was spending a lot of time trying to assure the world that they weren't like the big names in the video game, it was quite clear to Jones that they were much more like their suit-wearing owners than they'd care to admit. And so, when Take-Two purchased DMA in 1999, Jones decided to take the money and leave.
Still, despite everything, DMA delivered, and now it was up to Rockstar to ensure that Grand Theft Auto 2 sold like hotcakes. They started with E3, swaggering into the convention like they owned the place, sporting merchandise emblazoned with the Rockstar logo. After all, they didn't just want to sell GTA 2, they wanted to sell themselves. The shenanigans continued with a party across the street from the convention, where the publisher cavorted alongside strippers and rock bands, desperately trying to convey the game's debauchery by chugging beer and pretending to chop up piles of cocaine with gold Amex cards. Whether that was indeed pretend, we wouldn't like to speculate. I mean, I can't imagine you can work from 8 AM to 10 PM 7 days a week without a bit of help from your friend Charlie, but what do I know? In addition to all of this, the publisher also debuted a short promotional film for the game, which was produced by Jamie King on a budget of next to nothing, though he did end up blowing $150,000 on the endeavor. Were convention goers blown away by this low-rent version of Goodfellas? No, not exactly, but that didn't stop the studio from insisting on marketing GTA 2 themselves, detractors be damned. It was perhaps this pig-headedness that led to the studio's first major marketing misstep. Keen to cash in on the game's criminal overtones, Rockstar began running with their Steal This Game campaign, which involved said words being emblazoned on everything from billboards to the game itself.
Unsurprisingly, this backfired massively, as no retailer with even an ounce of common sense was willing to carry a game that encouraged patrons to rob them. They tried as best they could to salvage this hot mess, slapping great big censored stickers over the ads, but the whole debacle was, as Brian Baglow described it, a flip-up. He might have used a slightly different word there.
This was just the start of Rockstar's marketing woes, however. A website called Flipstar, again we are paraphrasing, began circulating, supposedly created by an ex-Rockstar employee to air their grievances with the company. Sam and his brother Dan, who had joined the company by this point, were spitting feathers over the whole situation and hired an investigator to find out who was behind it. It turned out, though, that Rockstar's PR team had drummed up the website as a marketing stunt, but although Sam and Dan quickly got on board, it too was another fumble. It wasn't just forces within their control that threatened GTA 2's release, however, and now feels like a good time to introduce you to another key player in Grand Theft Auto's fabled history. Viewer, meet Jack Thompson. You may not have heard of American activist Jack Thompson, and if you haven't, then you're one of the lucky ones.
A new violent video game has hit the streets, and we need to get rid of it before it warps any children with its bloops and bleeps.
But that game sounds awesome!
And therefore should be destroyed.
Born in Cleveland, Ohio, Thompson was a fairly reserved child growing up, but that quickly changed when he made it to adulthood and became a lawyer. Unlike many entering the legal profession who might want to hold corporations to account for their massacring of the environment or make sure that violent offenders end up behind bars, Thompson embarked on a different crusade, one that targeted popular culture. Before beginning this chapter, Thompson had to attend university to study law, where he promptly flunked the bar. Don't worry though, because a trip to Florida where he became a born-again Christian sorted him right out. He retook the bar and passed, which he took as a sign from God that it was his destiny to try and ruin as many people's fun as possible. He started with music. His first campaign was against Miami radio shock jock Neil Rogers, whom he tried to have removed from the air after getting his panties in a bunch about the naughty things he had to say. Upon successfully having the station fined by the FCC, he turned his attention to rap music, famously rallying alongside Charlton Heston to have Ice-T dropped by his label Time Warner over the song Cop Killer. Regrettably, his endeavours were once again fruitful. Suddenly, Jack Thompson was the poster boy for censorship, and it wasn't long before he was setting his sights on another form of media: video games. Thompson started by going after the studios behind a number of popular games, including Doom, Quake, and Resident Evil following the 1997 Heath High School shooting, as he alleged that these games, alongside the movie The Basketball Diaries, were at least partially responsible for 14-year-old Michael Carneal's actions. The lawsuit was eventually thrown out on the grounds that Thompson had failed to present a legally recognizable claim, but the seeds were planted in the minds of many members of the public, and the debate around whether video games cause real-world violence was sparked once more. It didn't take long for Thompson to find the puff of oxygen that would set the debate ablaze. In April 1999, he was at home taking care of his son when he got his whammy. Two teenagers, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, had walked into their high school in Columbine, Colorado, and opened fire, killing 12 students and a teacher and injuring dozens more.
Whilst the FBI speculated that the boys were suffering from mental illnesses, Jack Thompson pointed the finger of blame elsewhere. He was quickly on the phone with Columbine's local sheriff's office, asserting that video games were responsible for Klebold and Harris's actions and that his research into the Heath High School case proved this.
Soon, the media was buzzing with the idea that Doom, Quake, Duke Nukem 3D, and Postal, alongside Marilyn Manson, were what tipped the two over the edge and drove them to massacre their classmates. This was terrible news for the games industry, which had already been forced to defend and semi-censor itself following the outrage surrounding Mortal Kombat and Night Trap in the early 90s. High-profile figures, including President Clinton, were now painting the medium as not only offensive, but as a menace to society and a danger to children. With that said, though, we suppose studios only had to worry if they were in the business of creating provocative games that might be seen as glorifying sex, drugs, crime, and violence. Oh dear. Despite Rockstar's best efforts, Grand Theft Auto 2 made it to release with very little in the way of controversy. Like its predecessor, the game released to middling reviews, though it only achieved about a third of the sales of its progenitor. If the series was to continue, it needed some fresh ideas, a new direction, a third dimension. Thankfully, around the time that Rockstar were getting to work on Grand Theft Auto 3, Sony was sending out the development kits for the PlayStation 2, a console that offered near limitless opportunities to game studios. Thanks to its DVD-ROM technology, basically as long as a developer could dream it, the PS2 could handle it, and goodness gracious did Sam have big dreams for GTA 3. He wanted to make, in his own words, the first interactive gangster movie with influences like The Sopranos, The Getaway, and Heat. He also envisioned a trilogy of games, with the first set in a fantastical version of his new home. Finally, he eschewed the live action that had been present in 2, insisting that everything the player saw be done by the game engine, and hiring talented young director Naveed Konsari to help bring the vision to life through motion capture. The GTA 3 team, which was full of passionate, talented folks like game tester Jeremy Pope and up-and-coming filmmaker Mark Fernandez, started by dreaming up Liberty City, a location which, according to them, was to be the worst place in America, but in all the best possible ways. Liberty City was split into 3 distinct areas: an industrial zone, which was inspired by the boroughs of Brooklyn and Queens, a suburban locale not unlike Jersey, and a bustling metropolitan hub that bore more than a passing resemblance to Manhattan.
From these routes, the game blossomed. The devs created a transit system, weather conditions, and different physics for each of the game's vehicles. Dozens upon dozens of characters littered the streets, and for them, over 100,000 lines of dialogue were created.
Dan Houser, Sam's Oxford-educated younger brother, began bringing the story together, casting the player as a delinquent who escapes a police truck on his way to prison and is forced to work his way back up the criminal corporate ladder. They also drew some inspiration from their Take-Two overlords, casting famous faces in key roles, from Reservoir Dogs' Michael Madsen to Twin Peaks' Kyle MacLachlan, and even their gangster flick hero, Frank Vincent. Everything was going according to plan, but you know what they say about the best laid plans of mice and men. The threats to GTA 3 were, perhaps coincidentally, threefold. The first two were thanks to State of Emergency, a beat-em-up published by Rockstar and developed at the same time as GTA 3. Naturally, as publishers are wont to do, Rockstar took its upcoming titles to E3 in 2001, but were dismayed to find that State of Emergency was far more popular with congoers than GTA 3. They much preferred the outlandish violence in State of Emergency, complete with chair throwing and explosions, to the visceral, realistic violence on display in GTA 3. Not all of the attention State of Emergency was getting, however, was positive, as it bore numerous similarities to the real-life World Trade Organization riots which took place in Seattle in 1999. Politicians called the game an anarchist training simulator, and suddenly Rockstar were faced with the possibility that their upcoming games would be given an adults-only rating, which might not sound too bad, but at the time many American retailers, the likes of Walmart and Best Buy included, would refuse to stock AO-rated games.
The final problem, however, was bigger than Sam, bigger than Rockstar, and bigger than the entirety of the video games industry. September the 11th, 2001 began as a day like any other. Millions of New Yorkers woke up, had breakfast, and headed into the city for work or other reasons, just as they would have hundreds, if not thousands of times before. Little did they know, however, that something monstrous was about to happen that would not only change their lives, but the lives of people the world over.
That morning, 19 terrorists hijacked 4 commercial airliners which had taken off from the east coast of America and were bound for California. One crash-landed in rural Pennsylvania after the passengers revolted against the terrorists, with all 44 people aboard being killed. One crashed into the Pentagon, killing all 64 people aboard the plane and 125 people inside the Pentagon itself. The final 2 struck both the north and south towers of the World Trade Center in New York City, resulting in the collapse of both and the deaths of 2,763 people. Sam watched on from his apartment window as thick black smoke rolled over his beloved city. Soon after, Sam, not wishing to resemble the terrorists in any way, cropped his long hair short, but it wasn't just him that needed to be careful about the impression he made on others.
There was talk of completely canning GTA 3. After all, Rockstar had created a game in which players could explore a city much like New York and embark on a crime spree, murdering innocent people and watching them explode into showers of gore. Hell, some of the buildings even resembled the World Trade Center.
Rather than cancelling or shelving GTA 3 though, Rockstar and Sony took the decision to make alterations to the title, toning down the gore, changing the buildings, and framing the protagonist as an anti-hero rather than an out-and-out criminal. After months of hard work and endless setbacks, Grand Theft Auto 3 was finally released in October 2001, and to say the world went mad for it would be a massive understatement. Unlike its predecessors, which got a middling response both critically and commercially, Grand Theft Auto 3 was a slam dunk in both areas. Reviewers lined up to heap praise upon the game, lauding its vast open world, 3D graphics, sound, music, voice acting, story, and overall scope. In fact, you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone in the games industry who had a single bad thing to say about it. GTA 3 achieved an average review score of 97%, one of the highest in gaming history, and tying it with Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3, released just a week later for the title of Best Reviewed PS2 Game of All Time. Not only did it garner an incredible response from critics, but Grand Theft Auto 3 sold like hotcakes as well, racking up 2 million units sold by February 2002 and 14.5 million units sold by March 2008, which is, we suppose, the point at which they stopped counting.
Not everyone was impressed though. GameSpot awarded it the title of Most Offensive Game of the Year. Multiple outlets decried the graphic violence despite it having been toned down somewhat, and Australia outright banned it, forcing Take-Two to recall it and for Rockstar to make changes.
You can't make an omelette without breaking a few eggs though, and what an omelette Grand Theft Auto 3 was. Following the launch of GTA 3, Sam Houser had a big problem. Admittedly, it was a nice problem to have, but it was a problem nonetheless. How the hell do you top something as monumentally successful as Grand Theft Auto 3? The answer, it would seem, would require a trip back in time. Like GTA 3, Vice City was heavily inspired by the pop culture that Sam had grown up on, but this time he and the Rockstar team looked to the crime-based media of the 80s. Scarface, Miami Vice, Apocalypse Now, these were the properties the company looked to for inspiration, and before long Sam had flown the Edinburgh-based DMA team, who by this point had become Rockstar North, out to Miami to soak in the ambiance. Over the course of 7 days, the Pasty Scots took hundreds upon hundreds of photographs of everything from streets and buildings to palm trees and sunsets, and by the end of the week, they had formulated a vision of Vice City itself, along with some really bad sunburns.
Knowing they'd struck gold with GTA 3 meant that the devs didn't have to reinvent the wheel when it came to Vice City's gameplay. Of course, they iterated on what they'd previously done. They made changes so that character models moved more believably, better physics meant more choice of vehicles, and a new lighting system brought Sam's dreams of a neon wonderland to life in stunning Technicolor.
The all-star cast of 3 had gone down a treat with players, so for Vice City, Rockstar brought in a veritable bounty of celebrities to play a whole host of characters. Burt Reynolds, Dennis Hopper, Lee Majors, Jenna Jameson, and even Ray Liotta all lent their talents to the game. Because of how much of a smash hit GTA 3 had become, the hype surrounding Vice City was palpable, and as such the pressure was on down at Rockstar HQ. Sam was prone to frequent outbursts of anger, something felt especially by Donovan, King, and his brother Dan. It wasn't just the higher-ups acting out either. The team at Rockstar North frequently made use of promotional GTA 3 baseball bats to make their anger known. Some roamed the Rockstar loft carrying, thankfully unloaded, guns, and the testers started taking their frustrations out on the PS2 hardware, allegedly launching one out of a third-story window one particularly fraught day.
Oh, and we haven't even mentioned the crunch. In order to get Vice City on shelves in the year they had to develop it, the whole team was working ridiculous hours, usually from around 11 AM to 3 AM. Tensions ran incredibly high.
After several stressful months though, Vice City was released, and it became the highest rated PS2 title of 2002, outscoring the likes of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4, Time Splitters 2, and Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell in the review stakes, and selling over 1.4 million copies in just 2 days, making it the fastest selling video game in history at that time. Was all of the stress worth it? We'll let you make up your own mind about that. It was late evening on June the 25th, 2003 on Interstate 40, and as usual, thousands of cars were passing through Newport, Tennessee. For most, the journey was like any other, but for a handful of people, the journey was about to become a nightmare. Waiting, gun in hand, in some nearby trees were stepbrothers William and Joshua Buckner, who began opening fire on the highway. One man, Aaron Hamill, a 45-year-old registered nurse from Ontario, was pronounced dead at the scene, and a woman, 19-year-old Kimberly Bede from Virginia, had been shot in the hip, fragments of the bullet lodged in her spine.
There was no lengthy manhunt for these two boys. They were found almost immediately hiding in bushes near the scene of the crime. When asked why they'd done it, they admitted that they were bored, had found a rifle locked away in their home, and had decided to take it and imitate their favorite video game. No prizes for guessing what that game might be.
By this point, Rockstar were already firmly on Jack Thompson's radar. In a bid to prove that, despite the protestations of those in the games industry, retailers were more than happy to sell M-rated titles to children, he had gone to his local Best Buy, sent in his son to purchase a copy of Grand Theft Auto Vice City, and filmed the whole thing. He'd also made an attempt to involve himself in the trial of Dustin Lynch, a teenager who, in 2002, murdered 17-year-old Jolynn Mishney. However, despite sticking his nose into criminal proceedings, Thompson didn't end up defending Lynch. By the time the Buckners opened fire on the highway, Thompson was already incensed by the content of Rockstar's games and was convinced they were being marketed towards children, so now he had a good reason to take them to task, not just morally, but legally too.
In October 2003, Thompson filed a lawsuit on behalf of the Buckners' victims, which targeted Rockstar, Take-Two, Sony Computer Entertainment, and Walmart, and alleged that those involved with GTA 3's development and distribution should have known that it would inspire copycat violence in the real world. He sought $246 million in damages.
On October the 22nd, 2003, the case was moved to federal court, but just 2 days later, the plaintiffs, i.e. the attorneys of the victims, dismissed the suit altogether. You'd think this would come as something of a blow to Thompson. After all, even the Buckners' victims and their families had no interest in blaming Grand Theft Auto for the shootings, at least not on a legal level. You'd be wrong though, and if anything, he was further emboldened, saying, "The goal is to destroy the video game industry." The suit hadn't completely failed, mind you, as the seed planted with his previous suit continued to germinate. Do games like Grand Theft Auto have the power to turn otherwise stable, well-mannered children into sadistic killing machines? No, of course they don't, but that didn't stop some retailers from pulling Vice City from shelves. Thompson's crusade was just beginning, and if Grand Theft Auto had made him mad, then the game that Rockstar released at the end of 2003 surely made steam shoot out of his ears. Picture the scene. A convicted death row inmate is led to his execution. People look on as he's given the lethal injection and his lifeless body is removed from view. But wait, he's not dead, just sedated, and is taken to another part of the city where a disembodied voice known only as the Director tells him he can earn his freedom, but only if he murders the gang members sent to kill him in increasingly gory ways, all whilst being filmed for the entertainment of rich bastards, of course. Sounds like the premise of the latest Eli Roth movie, doesn't it? Well, back when he made vomit-inducing horror flicks like Hostel and The Green Inferno rather than documentaries about sharks and Borderlands.
It's Pete. It's Pete. Why do you think it's called piss wash?
It's in my mouth!
Anyway, but no, this is the story of Manhunt, Rockstar's 2003 stealth title in which players control James Earl Cash as he sneaks about a fictional city committing horrific murders left, right, and centre. Critically, Manhunt went down alright. It was likened to games such as Splinter Cell and Metal Gear Solid 2, and on the whole, reviewers commended the fact that Rockstar had pushed the envelope, with any negative commentary being directed towards the frustrating shooting mechanics and wonky AI rather than the graphic content.
Naturally, the violence didn't go unnoticed. Manhunt was banned in numerous countries around the world, including South Korea, New Zealand, and Germany, and was effectively banned in Australia when it was refused classification. However, in countries where it wasn't banned, including the United States, Manhunt was released in all of its violent, uncensored glory, which didn't sit too well with a certain Florida-based lawyer, and it wasn't long before Thompson had found a reason to try to sue Rockstar yet again.
In July of 2004, 8 months after the release of Manhunt, 14-year-old Stefan Pekira of Leicestershire, England, was lured into a local wood by his friend Warren LeBlanc, who proceeded to beat Pekira to death with a claw hammer. Immediately, the media swarmed the case, claiming that LeBlanc had a copy of Manhunt in his room and that the game had influenced the 17-year-old to commit this horrific act of violence. This was all it took to get Jack Thompson interested in the case. By August 2nd, Pekira's family had hired Thompson to represent them in a wrongful death suit against Rockstar and Sony to the tune of £50 million. That same day, however, the police denied any links between Manhunt and Pekira's murder, confirming that the game had been found in Pekira's bedroom, not LeBlanc's. The judge presiding over the criminal case placed responsibility for the murder, which was ruled as a robbery gone wrong, with Warren LeBlanc. He was sentenced to 13 years in prison, and the case against Rockstar and Sony was dropped soon after. Naturally, Jack Thompson was undeterred, claiming that Take-Two had lied about the incident when they refuted the crime's connection to Manhunt, and that Leicestershire police were wrong when they said the copy of Manhunt was Pekira's and not LeBlanc's. This tendency to run his mouth will come back to bite Thompson in the arse, so, don't worry.
Still, Manhunt didn't come out of this completely scot-free. Due to the controversy, a number of UK retailers refused to continue carrying the game, though the speculation that it might be banned did invigorate gamers' interest in it, so the jury's out on whether the controversy hurt or helped Manhunt's UK sales.
It turns out, though, that Jack Thompson wasn't the only one outraged by Manhunt. Even some Rockstar staffers felt that the company was taking things too far. Former Rockstar employee Jeff Williams said of Manhunt in 2007, "There was almost a mutiny at the company over that game. It just made us all feel icky. It was all about the violence, and it was realistic violence. We all knew there was no way we could explain away that game. There was no way to rationalize it. We were crossing a line." Furthermore, Jeremy Pope, who had once been so enthusiastic about working with Sam Houser that he took a pay cut to do so, was beginning to sour on Rockstar. He and several of his peers felt not only that Manhunt was way over the line, but that its contents echoed their experiences with the company. No longer were they the middle finger to corporate gaming, they were corporate gaming, and any sort of dissent, including warnings to Sam that Manhunt was simply too much, was met with a swift, "Go flip yourself." They were the James Earl Cash to Sam's director.
Done with the entire company, Pope decided to leave Rockstar, and he and Mark Fernandez, along with several other Rockstar staff, started their own company, its name inspired by the logo emblazoned sweaters that Sam and the other higher-ups wore around the office. Cashmere Games.
Alas, the fact that Googling Kashmir Games yields only results about a character from the Hunger Games named Kashmir tells you roughly all you need to know about the success of said endeavour. The list you just saw, as many of you will surely know, is Big Smoke's Cluckin' Bell order from Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. That's right, we're off to the West Coast. Under the watchful eye of Take-Two, Rockstar had overseen the creation of not one, but 2 games that had been both critically and commercially successful. Could they make it a hat trick? In short, yes. Vice City had been set in Miami in the 1980s, and so Sam felt that the natural progression was to take things to the West Coast and set the game in the 1990s, specifically 1992.
Rather than giving the teams a break after the release of Vice City, however, Rockstar pushed ahead with the development of San Andreas, something that a lot of staff weren't happy about. Promised celebrations never materialized. Gary Foreman worried that the company had gone into constant crunch mode, and Jamie King was nearly destroyed by the stress of it all. To make matters worse, Sam's golden children, Jeremy Pope and Mark Fernandez, had abandoned him.
There was one thing that united everyone at Rockstar though, a hatred of Jack Thompson. They didn't understand why they were being targeted when, at the time, the US was at war with Iraq, which seemed to them like a much bigger deal. It turns out that Thompson wasn't the only one upset with Rockstar, as one particular line in Vice City caused an uproar with the Haitian community. In one mission in the game, the player character Tommy Vercetti is tasked with taking a group of armed Cubans to the enclave of a Haitian gang with the aim of taking them out. In a cutscene, the Cuban gang's leader Humberto Robina tells Tommy, "Take my boys over there and then we'll take these Haitians down." Naturally, Robina meant this gang of Haitians and not all Haitians, but apparently some context was lost along the way, and before long Rockstar had the entire Haitian community standing against them, demanding that Vice City be pulled from shelves.
Little did folks know, however, that Rockstar had plans to delve even deeper into America's racial tensions in Vice City's sequel. San Andreas was set to focus on the gangs of California and would center on an African-American protagonist, something which hadn't really been seen in AAA video games up to that point.
To get ahead of any potential controversy, Rockstar decided to invite Entertainment Software Association President Doug Lowenstein to take a sneak peek at San Andreas before it was formally submitted to the ESRB for rating. He wasn't super keen on the game itself, but then again GTA had never really been his bag, but what properly concerned him was the representation of minorities. Foreseeing another backlash like the one from the Haitian community, Lowenstein implored Rockstar to seek guidance on how best to portray the game's characters and to engage with the Congressional Black Caucus and get them on side. And to his absolute shock, Rockstar did exactly that. They brought in consultants to ensure that the representation of black communities in the game was handled sensitively and delicately. With that potential scandal under control, surely there was absolutely no way that San Andreas could get Rockstar into hot water. Buckle up, gang, because this is quite the saga. By the time San Andreas went into development, Sam still had a bee in his bonnet about magic and elves and making games for proper adults, so it's not really surprising he started to look to include certain, shall we say, adult activities in Rockstar's games. There was just one teeny tiny snafu. Including any sort of nudity or simulated sexual acts would see the game slapped with an adults-only rating, and most retailers would refuse to carry it. Sam, incensed by the idea that a glorified shop like Walmart could tell him what to put in his game, fired off an email to Jennifer Colby, Rockstar's Director of Operations, on July 14, 2004, laying out just what he thought of the situation and exactly what he wanted to do about it.
The email listed a number of sexual acts that our YouTube overlords would get mighty mad at us for repeating, that Sam wanted to include in the game, and concluded with him asking Jennifer for advice on how to proceed. She recommended that the studio would need to be really careful, as such content would likely get San Andreas an AO rating from the ESRB, and even if they did manage an M rating, many retailers would still refuse to carry the game if they knew it had naughty bits in it.
Still, it wasn't a no, so Sam sent his team on a fact-finding mission in order to better understand what the world deemed acceptable from a sexual standpoint. Sadly, the findings were not to Sam's liking. Much of Europe was fine with a bit of nudity, both male and female, as long as the camera didn't get too close and certain areas didn't become, shall we say, excited. Self-love and special kisses, again, I'm so sorry, blame the losers in advertising, would also be fine, providing no one could see any winkle. But spanking was likely to get the game on the wrong side of everyone, except Spain and Italy, for some reason. Australia was more or less cool with all of this as well, but for them, male nudity was a no-no. Then there was the United States. Absolutely no male nudity, no full frontal female nudity, no female nipples, and no sexual activity implied or otherwise. Not if Rockstar wanted to avoid the death knell that was the adults-only rating. Sam was outraged. He'd come to America to make the games he wanted. After all, the place badged itself as the land of the free, and yet this country's censorship laws were proving to be more restrictive than almost any others. Furthermore, not everyone at Rockstar was on his side. The company's co-founder, Gary Foreman, thought that the scenes were juvenile and didn't understand why Sam was so hell-bent on keeping them in the game. For me, sorry, I'm not 12 anymore. It was unnecessary. There were conversations about pushing the barriers of what we could do, but I felt personally it was, at that point, gratuitous.
Sam had a huge choice to make. He could either deploy the game as it was and get slapped with an adults-only rating, all but ensuring the game's commercial failure, or he could relent and bow to the censors, but secure the financial success of San Andreas.
In the end, though, Rockstar yielded and removed most of the explicit content from the game. CJ would get to do the hanky-panky with his girlfriend, but the screen would fade to black and players wouldn't get to see it. This posed its own set of problems, though. The release date of San Andreas was just weeks away at this point, and removing bits of code isn't as simple and straightforward as one might think. Very basically, code isn't like a Word document where if you get rid of one paragraph, everything else stays intact. Sometimes. No, code is more like a game of Jenga. If you remove a block, everything else might be okay, but remove the wrong bit or remove something without being careful, and the whole thing comes crashing down. Being acutely aware of this fact, Rockstar took the decision not to remove the code completely, but instead to wrap it, essentially masking the code so that players wouldn't be able to access it. With the questionable content hidden from view, Rockstar now had the fun job of submitting San Andreas to the ESRB for rating. They, as publisher, were required to send in footage of the game, the absolute worst, most morally objectionable bits, and this footage was shown to a group of raters, everyday people from all walks of life who applied to the ESRB for the privilege of casting judgment on video games. After viewing what Rockstar had sent in and taking notes, they then came together, along with a foreman, to discuss their findings, and their conclusions were unanimous. Grand Theft Auto San Andreas will be rated M for mature.
This was great news for Rockstar, as it meant that retailers would be happy to stock the game. It was released in October 2004, and like 3 and Vice City before it, the game was both a critical and commercial success. Within its first week, San Andreas sold over 4.5 million copies, meaning that it had outsold Vice City by a whopping 45%.
Rockstar were, presumably, over the moon. Little did they know, however, that across the pond, a Dutch modder named Patrick Wildenborg was about to discover something that would very much rain on their parade. Patrick Wildenborg was not like Jack Thompson. He was a huge fan of the Grand Theft Auto series and would often play Vice City in the evenings once his children had gone to bed. He played it so much, in fact, that he quickly ran out of games, something which dismayed him greatly. Thankfully, he was able to extend the game's longevity by hacking and modding it, eventually creating the Marina Car Park mod, which allowed players to store anywhere up to 40 cars rather than the paltry 4 that the base game offered. When San Andreas was released, Wildenborg was ecstatic, and he was soon poking around in the code to see what gems he could unearth. But he wasn't prepared for what he'd discover. Obviously, he found the hot coffee code. Oh dear.
He and numerous others started a secret forum where they came together to discuss and try to crack the code. After all, they could see the code itself, but they had no idea what it would actually do if rendered. However, another modder, Barton Waterduck, which is probably not their real name, was able to run the code through some rather crude programs, and eventually the curtain was lifted. Hidden amongst San Andreas' code was a minigame in which players could control CJ as he did the nasty.
Soon, a video of the sequence had been uploaded to the internet, and it quickly went viral. Rockstar were in big trouble. You see, the situation didn't just reflect badly on Sam Houser and co. Admittedly, yes, it reflected on them rather badly indeed, because it looked to the public like they had been purposefully deceptive in order to achieve an M rating for San Andreas. But it was bad news for the games industry as a whole. Some politicians in Washington were already calling for a ban on the sale of M-rated games to anyone under the age of 17. Now, it looked like the ESRB couldn't even be trusted to rate games properly. How could they? They'd let this abhorrent filth get away with an M rating after all. The ESRB themselves were furious. Nothing like this had ever happened before. Had Rockstar purposefully misled them? Was the hot coffee minigame the work of modders? Answers were needed, and quickly, so Pat Vance of the ESRB reached out to Take-Two to try and work out what had gone wrong. Paul Ebler, then CEO of Take-Two, assured the ESRB that the minigame was a third-party modification, implying that Rockstar had nothing to do with it. Vance wasn't convinced and announced that the ESRB would be undertaking a full investigation. The integrity of the ESRB rating system is founded on the trust of consumers who increasingly depend on it to provide complete and accurate information about what's in a game. If, after a thorough investigation of all of the relevant facts surrounding this modification, we determine a violation of our rules has occurred, we will take appropriate action. No one actually knew what said appropriate action would be. As we said, nothing like this had ever happened before. The ESRB weren't the only ones up in arms, however. Rockstar's very own Gary Foreman was also cross. Remember our Jenga analogy? If you remove a block, everything else might be okay, but remove the wrong bit or remove something without being careful, and the whole thing comes crashing down. Well, it turns out that Sam had told Terry Donovan that yanking out the hot coffee block would have been far too dangerous so late in the game's production and could have sent the entire tower crashing down. Chief Technical Officer Foreman wholeheartedly disagreed, later stating that it would have been no more than a couple of days' worth of work to get rid of the code and that the fact it wasn't fully removed was pure laziness. What's worse is that he was told that the scenes were removed, not merely wrapped, leading to feelings that he had been duped.
Wildenborg was also less than happy, not with the content of the minigame, but with Rockstar's response to it. This gaming company that he had so admired, who had basically encouraged their modding community to create things with their game, had thrown him under the bus. Their PR team had been asked if the hot coffee code was included on the game discs manufactured by Rockstar, and they had said categorically that it wasn't. They were essentially calling Wildenborg a liar.
Still, he didn't want to cause them any further harm and released a statement to the New York Times on the matter that was deemed a Rockstar-friendly reply, which concluded with him saying that Grand Theft Auto is not a game for young children and is rated accordingly. The day after the Times story ran, he received a call from Rockstar telling him that they appreciated what he'd said about how the hot coffee minigame was only playable when San Andreas was modded, and telling him that they were going to issue a statement and not to worry too much about it. He presumably thought that Rockstar were going to come clean, tell the world that the code was indeed on the disc, but that it had been hidden and wasn't intended for release, and that they'd never meant to deceive the ESRB or anyone else for that matter. They did not do this. They instead plunged another knife into Wildenborg's back and tried to make out that they were the innocent victims in all of this. Nice one, gang.
The modding community was enraged. Gary Foreman and several of his colleagues were enraged, and in Miami, Florida, Jack Thompson was rubbing his grubby little mitts together in glee.
It gets worse though, because Thompson had a new friend, Senator Hillary Clinton, and she already had Grand Theft Auto in her sights. In March 2005, she had given an impassioned speech to the Kaiser Family Foundation on the subject of violent media, GTA included, and its potential harmful impacts on youngsters. After hearing said speech, Thompson immediately sought her out as a potential ally, writing to her in order to urge her to support a ban on the sale of M-rated video games to children, warning her that more Columbines were coming. However, with hot coffee making headlines, now it was Clinton knocking on Thompson's door, figuratively, of course. He was delighted to be getting through to senior politicians and wasted no time in educating Clinton on the dangers that the likes of Grand Theft Auto pose to society. She introduced a bill that would make it illegal for retailers to sell sexually explicit and violent games to minors and would see any who were found to have broken said law slapped with a $5,000 fine. Meanwhile, Thompson and his cronies were trying to get to the bottom of the whole hot coffee fracas. His pal, Dr. David Walsh, went to the press and demanded Take-Two tell the truth, urging them to confirm whether the code was on the disc or not. Just hours later, his phone was ringing, and an anonymous tipster who claimed to work in the games industry told him categorically that the code was on the disc.
Walsh, needing proof of these claims, sought out a hacker who, for the low price of just $2,000, was able to hack a San Andreas disc and confirm that hot coffee was indeed there.
The good news, for everyone who hates Jack Thompson and his mates that is that Walsh's $2,000 were utterly wasted, as the ESRB had wrapped up its investigation, confirming in the process that Hot Coffee was indeed on the disc. They gave Take-Two just two options. Either recall San Andreas and accept an AO rating, or the ESRB would revoke its classification entirely, meaning the game was off the market. Sam and co. pouted and pleaded, arguing that they were being penalised due to a mod, something which had never been done before. The ESRB wouldn't budge, however, and told them to either take the AO rating or see their game basically banned. Sam stomped his feet, but in the end, it was no use. Take-Two were forced to recall the game at an approximate cost of $25 million, and Rockstar were left to hang their heads in shame. Alas, this was far from the end of the ordeal. Rockstar were in a lot of trouble. Their refusal to remove the Hot Coffee code from San Andreas had cost them dearly, and practically everyone was pissed off at them. Their parent company, Take-Two, had been forced to spend a reported $25 million to clean up a mess that could have been fixed in a couple of days prior to launch, according to Gary Foreman anyway. Jack Thompson and his cronies felt emboldened and were now thoroughly convinced that companies like Rockstar were out to corrupt the youth. And the ESRB were left in a very awkward position. Would anyone trust their judgment after the scandal surrounding San Andreas?
It gets worse though. The games industry had spent years up until this point campaigning and lobbying in order to be understood. Countless hours and millions of dollars had been spent trying to convince the public that video games were a serious medium of entertainment. Rockstar's blunder had destroyed all of that goodwill overnight.
Politicians started speaking out against the industry. Washington State Representative Mary Lou Dickerson told the Los Angeles Times, "It looks like Take-Two Interactive purposefully conned the video game industry rating board and parents across the country. San Andreas, as a top-selling game in the country, now is in the hands of children who can practice interactive pornography. There should be legal consequences, so the company doesn't laugh all the way to the bank." And legal consequences there were. Such was the uproar surrounding the scandal that the House of Representatives voted 355 to 21 in favor of the Federal Trade Commission investigating Take-Two in order to determine whether or not Rockstar had committed fraud by way of intentionally misleading the ESRB. This was very bad news indeed for Take-Two, because should the FTC conclude that Rockstar had indeed misled the ESRB with intent, they were looking at a very steep fine. Thankfully, in the end, Take-Two and Rockstar walked away with little more than a slap on the wrist and instructions to clearly label where their games contained content like that found in Hot Coffee, but it could have been a whole lot worse, at least from a financial standpoint anyway. Numerous states, including California, Michigan, and Illinois, began ramping up their efforts to prevent M-rated games from being sold to minors, and Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was at the time governor of California, enacted a bill that banned the sale of violent games to under 18s. Should any retailer be caught doing so, they'd be liable for a $1,000 fine for each infraction. Hillary Clinton, backed by Senator Joe Lieberman, pushed forward with the Family Entertainment Protection Act, a bill which, had it actually passed, would have banned the sale of M-rated games to minors countrywide and would have opened the ESRB up to government audits, something the games industry was very keen to ensure didn't happen. Thankfully, the bill did not become law, as it expired at the end of the 109th Congress without further action.
Alongside the ire of politicians and special interest groups, lawsuits started stacking up as well. An 85-year-old woman from New York named Florence Cohen decided to sue Rockstar and Take-Two, alleging that she had bought the game for her 14-year-old grandson when it was M-rated and never would have purchased it had it gotten the AO rating it had eventually ended up with. She demanded her money back, along with various damages caused by Rockstar's alleged false advertising of the game. She wasn't the only one either.
The city of Los Angeles and numerous other plaintiffs also launched civil proceedings against Rockstar and Take-Two, and eventually all of the suits were amalgamated into one. The case was eventually settled, and it was ruled that anyone who had bought the game before it was bestowed its AO rating was eligible to claim up to $35, though in the end, less than 3,000 people bothered to claim this money. This was just the cherry on top though, because at the time all of this was going down, Take-Two was already under investigation by the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. Ryan Brandt, Take-Two's founder and chairman, was up on allegations of insider trading, and the shareholders weren't best pleased. This, along with the hot coffee scandal, culminated in another lawsuit, and Take-Two were, in 2009, ordered to pay $20 million and enact changes that would protect shareholders in the future. So, the public were mad at Rockstar, Take-Two were mad at Rockstar, politicians were mad at Rockstar, anyone else? Well, yes, actually, as we mentioned, the games industry had put a great deal of time, money, and effort into convincing the public that they posed no threat, and Rockstar's carelessness and arrogance had undone a lot of that hard work. People were pissed off. Warren Spector, who worked on games such as System Shock, Deus Ex, and the Ultima series, took to the stage at the Montreal Game Developers Conference and called GTA an urban thuggery simulator, wished that Rockstar would direct their genius towards something we could show enriches the culture instead of debases it, and warned that we are dead square in the cultural crosshairs right now. Game Daily, an industry trade publication, felt the same, writing in an editorial piece that the video games industry is well along the road to losing the culture war in the United States. And to top it all off, Jack Thompson was back on his nonsense again. The Loft, Rockstar's offices in New York, had once been a hive of activity, bustling with creatives, all of whom were excited to be bringing the company's next envelope-pushing title to life. In the wake of the hot coffee incident, however, the mood was decidedly more subdued. Suddenly, they weren't pioneers ushering in a new age of video gaming, they were outlaws, public enemy number one. By the end of 2006, 3 of the company's 5 co-founders had jumped ship. Jamie King and Gary Foreman decided to start their own company, and Terry Donovan just upped and left, never to return to the games industry. Jack Thompson wasn't helping matters either. Emboldened by the hot coffee scandal, his efforts to take down Rockstar and the games industry as a whole continued. He even took the fight directly to the Loft, gathering around 150 protesters to stand outside Rockstar's headquarters waving placards and chanting, "Hey hey, ho ho, Rockstar has got to go." 0 points for originality there.
As though he didn't have enough ammunition, Rockstar's October 2006 release added even more fuel to the fire.
Now, if you've played Bully, you'll know full well that the object of the game is to put a stop to the bullying taking place at Bulworth Academy. Players assume control of Jimmy Hopkins, a student who is involuntarily enrolled at the boarding school for a year, and it's up to them to get on the right side of each of the cliques with the end goal of uniting the nerds, preppies, greasers, and jocks against the bullies. A noble cause, I'm sure we can all agree. All Jack Thompson and his merry band of idiots saw, however, was the game's title, and they quickly jumped to the conclusion that Rockstar were planning to release a game in which the player became the bully rather than the savior of the bullied. Based on the game's moniker alone, Thompson launched a smear campaign which sought to have bully banned. He began by filing a lawsuit, naturally, prior to the game's release and its rating by the ESRB, calling the game a Columbine simulator and asking for an advance copy so that he could have an independent third party to evaluate it. Take-Two met him halfway and offered to show the game to Thompson and a judge, an offer which was accepted. The viewing, attended by Judge Ronald Friedman and Thompson, took place on the 12th of October 2006, and on the 13th of October 2006, the judge ruled in favour of allowing the game to be shipped, stating, "There's nothing in the game that you wouldn't see on TV every night."
He went on to say that he probably wouldn't want his kids playing it, but that shouldn't prevent the game from shipping. Thompson had failed, but he accepted his defeat with grace. I'm just joking, he had a full-blown tantrum.
He wrote an open letter to Friedman decrying the ruling and alleging that the judge's actions were on par with Iran leading UN weapons inspectors around the country, taking them to places where illegal activity was not occurring. He went on to accuse Take-Two's lawyer of lying in court, criticizing Friedman for not allowing a hearing to take place, and basically implied that he had blood on his hands. By now, Take-Two had had rather enough of Thompson and his litigation-happy approach to activism. In March 2007, they filed a lawsuit of their own, which sought to impose an injunction on Thompson that would prevent him from trying to block the releases of their upcoming titles Grand Theft Auto 4 and Manhunt 2, alleging that his actions violated the company's First Amendment rights. In a move that will come as a shock to absolutely no one, Thompson responded to the lawsuit with Sam Houser levels of arrogance. "I have been praying, literally, that Take-Two and its lawyers would do something so stupid, so arrogant, so dumb, even dumber than what they have to date done, that such a misstep would enable me to destroy Take-Two." Jack Thompson would end up settling.
Said settlement would prevent him from trying to ban the sale of Take-Two's games, threatening to sue them in the future, and from accusing them of any wrongdoing based on the selling of their games. Did it work? Of course not, but more on that later.
With Jack Thompson's nonsense dealt with, Rockstar were free to release Bully more or less unhindered, and it launched to a decent reception from critics. They very much enjoyed the script, missions, and characters, and the game went on to sell over 1.5 million copies, as well as earning a load of awards. It gets even better though, because not only were the naysayers proven wrong in their assumptions about the title, but the devs were praised for the fact that protagonist Jimmy Hopkins was casually able to kiss other boys, and he was celebrated by some publications as an LGBT+ icon. We have a sneaking suspicion the likes of Jack Thompson would have been just as incensed by Jimmy Hopkins kissing boys as they would about him beating them up, but who knows? Oh, we actually do, because he wrote to the ESRB complaining about the scenes. What a lovely man. With the launch of San Andreas, Rockstar had released 3 mainline GTA games in the space of as many years, and the pressure was on for a follow-up. With the release of the PS3 and Xbox 360, however, the devs suddenly had a lot more processing power to play with. So, rather than delving into the past and focusing the game on cities they barely knew, Sam and Dan decided now was the perfect time to render their present-day town in all of its glory. With the new Euphoria engine in their tool belts, a bit of kit that would allow them to create more realistic people, vehicles that handled like they would in real life, and stunning environments, the Edinburgh-based devs got to work trying to fully understand New York City. They trawled the streets, taking photos of everything they saw, visiting neighborhood after neighborhood to truly immerse themselves in the city's culture.
Once they returned to Scotland, their research continued, and they pored over endless books covering everything from New York's architecture to its transport systems and even its sewers.
Meanwhile, Dan Houser got to work on the story. The tale of a Serbian man hardened by war who crosses the Atlantic in pursuit of the American dream, only to find that the other side of the pond isn't all it's cracked up to be. Before long, GTA 4, named as such to highlight the series' advancement from 3, had a sprawling map and a wonderfully colourful cast of characters, including the stoic Nico Bellic, his bombastic cousin Roman, and Michelle, a woman who filled the role of love interest for Nico. The story was broken up into missions, each of which came with its own pre-rendered cutscenes and would guide the player through the massive open world that Rockstar had created. With that said though, players were also free to roam as they saw fit, undertaking side missions or simply driving around to see what they could find. Spend an evening at a nightclub, partake in a spot of bowling with your cousin, grab a bite at Cluckenbell, or if you promise not to tell Jack Thompson, frequent a strip club. By the end of its development period, an eye-watering $100 million had been spent on Grand Theft Auto 4, making it one of the most expensive video games of all time. In fact, by that point, only Halo 2 and Final Fantasy VII had outspent it.
The game finally got its release in April 2008, having been in development for around 3.5 years, and according to critics, it was one of the best video games ever made. Every last one of the 86 professional reviews available on Metacritic were positive, and of those, 48 publications bestowed upon GTA 4 a perfect score.
Reviewers struggled to find anything to complain about, lauding the game's story, open world, combat environments, new, darker tone, morality system, characters, sound design, music, voice acting.
War is where the young and stupid are tricked by the old and bitter into killing each other.
Online multiplayer. I could go on, but honestly I'd be here all day. This quality was reflected in GTA 4's sales figures as well. Despite the world being in a global recession, copies of the game shifted like plops off a shovel. Within 24 hours of its release, Grand Theft Auto 4 had sold over 3.6 million copies, and by the end of the first week that figure was over 6 million. By the end of the generation in 2013, the fourth entry in the Grand Theft Auto series had sold more than 25 million copies worldwide, making it one of the best-selling video games ever. It also broke no less than 3 world records. Highest grossing video game in 24 hours, highest revenue generated by an entertainment product in 24 hours, and fastest selling video game in 24 hours. Sam Houser was ecstatic. He'd finally achieved his dream. He and his team had created a game that blended fantasy and reality in a way no other had, and moreover, it was getting the same level of respect as films, TV, and novels. Alas, 2008 wasn't a great year for everybody. On the surface, you'd think that Sam Houser and Jack Thompson had nothing in common. One was a public schoolboy from London with a passion for hip-hop, gangster movies and video games, the other a born-again Christian lawyer from Ohio with nothing but contempt for such things.
The two did share a common trait, however, and that trait was arrogance. Sam Houser thought that he could put whatever he wanted in his video games and no one would bat an eyelid, thought he could hide a sex minigame in San Andreas when removing it altogether was just as simple, and thought that he and his company could get away with blaming modders when said sex minigame came to light. He was wrong.
Jack Thompson, on the other hand, thought that he could do and say whatever he pleased in his crusade against violent video games, and felt that because he'd been given a quest by God, it was fine to make false statements to tribunals and disparage and humiliate litigants. He too was wrong. In February 2007, the Florida bar began disbarment proceedings against Thompson after numerous parties had alleged misconduct in the form of humiliation, embarrassment, harassment, and intimidation. More than 2,400 pages of transcripts and 1,700 pages of exhibits pertaining to 31 separate violations were submitted and reviewed by Judge David Tunis, and in May 2008 she found Thompson guilty of 27 of the counts. He, naturally, wasn't about to take this lying down and filed a complaint against Tunis with the State Judicial Qualifications Commission. The following month, however, prosecutor Sheila Tumar recommended his punishment be even harsher, petitioning for enhanced disbarment, which would have lengthened the period before he could reapply for admission to the bar from 5 years to 10.
It got worse for Thompson though, because in July 2008, Tunis recommended he be disbarred permanently and face a fine of more than $40,000, which she felt was not only reflective of his misconduct, but also the fact that he hadn't shown an ounce of remorse for his actions.
Both the recommendation and fine were approved by the court on the 25th of September 2008, and Thompson was given 30 days to get his affairs in order and close his practice. He filed for a stay of the order but was ultimately denied, and since October 2008, Thompson has been unable to practice law. He would go on to claim that his disbarment was illegal and said that he would go back to his legal shenanigans, but at the time of writing, he hasn't yet put his theory to the test. The case was finally rested. Within the space of about 3 years, Sam Houser had gone from being one of the most infamous men in the games industry to one of the most celebrated. Grand Theft Auto 4 was nothing short of a work of art, and the wider entertainment industry recognized that. Furthermore, his biggest enemy had been cast out by the legal community and was now banned from practicing law, so whilst this didn't necessarily mean Thompson would give up on his noble crusade, at least he couldn't try and sue Rockstar anymore. So, what now? Rockstar's biggest games to date were centered around gangs. The drug cartels and criminal organizations in Vice City, the street gangs in San Andreas, the cliques in Bully, even Manhunt, which portrayed one man's desperate attempt to survive against brutal odds, was populated by gang members. As such, it was only logical that eventually Rockstar would turn their attention to the outlaw groups of the turn of the century, 19th to 20th, that is. They had released a Western video game once before. 2004's Red Dead Revolver, an action-adventure title set in the 1880s, had actually started out in Capcom's hands, but after Take-Two bought Angel Studios, the game's developer, it fell to Rockstar to get Revolver over the line.
When they started working on Red Dead Revolver, it was in a rather sorry state. Cultural differences between Capcom and Angel Studios had made the development to that point somewhat difficult, and despite looking rather nice, something noted by Dan Houser, it was basically unplayable.
There were some good ideas in there though, and so over the course of about 10 months, Angel Studios, now named Rockstar San Diego, reverse-engineered everything with Rockstar's supervision and transformed Red Dead Revolver into something that was worth playing. The game was a moderate success. Between its release in May 2004 and July 2010, almost 1 million units were sold, and when it first came out, it garnered review scores in the mid-70s. Rockstar knew, however, that if they'd had the game from the very beginning, it would have been much, much better. The idea for Red Dead Redemption had been floating around in the Rockstar offices since before the company got its hands on Revolver, but the technology of the 6th generation, i.e. the PS2, Xbox and GameCube, prevented the dream from being truly realized. However, when the development kits for the PS3 and Xbox 360 dropped, it was go time for Red Dead Redemption.
The early stages of the game's development began in 2005, but it wasn't until 2006 that the core team was brought together. Comprising developers from Rockstar San Diego, Leeds, New England, North, and Toronto, the Redemption development team ended up consisting of more than 1,000 people who came together to bring Rockstar's vision of an open-world western to life.
In the same way that Grand Theft Autos 3 through San Andreas were inspired by movies, Red Dead Redemption's script drew heavily from a range of different films, including the likes of The Wild Bunch, High Plains Drifter, and Unforgiven. However, unlike most Western fiction, which tends to be set in the mid to late 1800s, writers Dan Houser, Michael Unsworth, and Christian Cantamessa decided to set Redemption in 1911, which gave them the opportunity to create a tale centered on the death of the Old West rather than one set in its heyday. Over the course of 2 years, Dan, Unsworth, and Cantamessa produced a 1,500-page script that told the story of John Marston, a former outlaw who was forced to hunt down the members of his old gang after agents from the United States Bureau of Investigation kidnap his wife and son. Meanwhile, other parts of the team were busy creating the game's world, which not only needed to be massive but also needed to feel lived in. After all, there's not a lot of point in creating a huge map if there's nothing to do. They began, as Rockstar devs often did when starting work on a project, by embarking on something of a school trip. Sadly, with the game being set a century prior to its development, opportunities for immersing themselves in the culture of the Old West were somewhat hard to come by, so instead, they headed off to Washington, D.C. to visit the Library of Congress and the National Archives building. The team initially thought to design the game in a similar way to Grand Theft Auto 4, in other words, allowing players to explore the world by completing missions. However, they soon realized that doing it this way around could make the Old West feel somewhat empty. Instead, they sought not to fill every area of the map with quests, though obviously there were still plenty of those, and developed a realistic ecosystem that would lead players to random encounters with a plethora of different creatures. They did something similar with the NPCs, giving each of them a schedule of places to be and tasks to complete so that they'd feel more like real people and not, well, NPCs. Based on all of the prep and planning, you might come to the conclusion that the development of Red Dead Redemption was a breeze, but unfortunately this couldn't be further from the truth. Developers were put into a state of endless crunch, frequently forced to work 12-hour days, 6 days per week. This is bad enough in and of itself, but what's worse is that this didn't even yield results. Severe mismanagement led to a number of delays and ever-mounting development costs, and by the time Red Dead Redemption actually released, it's thought that Rockstar had spent anywhere between $80 and $100 million on the game. Furthermore, Rockstar New England's involvement in the project meant that a greenlit bully sequel would never see the light of day.
Despite the actual development being somewhat of a plot show, though, Red Dead Redemption made it to launch in May 2010, and honestly, it was the best thing since sliced bread, though sliced bread hadn't actually been invented by 1911 when the game is set. So is sliced bread technically the best thing since Red Dead Redemption? Who knows?
Like GTA 3, Vice City, San Andreas, and 4, Red Dead Redemption released to universal acclaim, racking up an average critic score of 95 and an average user score of 90 out of 100. The game was truly something spectacular. It looked and sounded like a Hollywood blockbuster, the world was bustling with activity, and the story was captivating with a climax that some described as one of the best in gaming. Redemption was nominated for a bucket load of awards too and took home a ton of accolades, including the Game Developers Choice Awards and the Spike Video Game Awards Game of the Year trophies. Rockstar were riding high. The company that had just 5 years prior to Redemption's release been the bane of the games industry was now its darling, responsible for not one but 2 games that had helped to transform the public's view of the medium. Video games were now considered art by many, and Grand Theft Auto 4 and Red Dead Redemption were surely at least partially responsible for this. So, what's next? Well, do it all over again, I suppose. Between 2010 and 2013, Rockstar released a handful of well-received video games. Red Dead Redemption Undead Nightmare did well with zombie-obsessed gamers at the turn of the decade. Max Payne 3 was thought to be another excellent entry into the franchise, and L.A. Noire, though marred by controversy over Team Bondi's development practices, garnered an impressive response from both players and critics. During this time, however, Rockstar were also busy cooking up their biggest game yet, the hotly anticipated Grand Theft Auto 5.
As had become rather standard by this point, Rockstar got to work on GTA 5 more or less as soon as GTA 4 was done and dusted. The 360-strong team at Rockstar North joined forces with other Rockstar studios the world over, and over the course of around 3 years, more than 1,000 people contributed to Grand Theft Auto 5.
The decision was taken to set the game in San Andreas, the fictional state that the likes of Carl, CJ Johnson, Big Smoke, and Sweet called home. It turns out that despite San Andreas being beloved by gamers all over the globe, Sam Houser and many others in the team hadn't been all that pleased with its world design. The feeling was that they had perhaps been too ambitious trying to include 3 cities in the game due to the technological restrictions of the time, and that they'd felt more like 3 villages patched together with a bit of countryside. The times, they were a-changin' though. The medium had come on in leaps and bounds, and what might have been nearly impossible a handful of years prior was suddenly very doable. Bolstered by much more powerful hardware, Rockstar were free to create the San Andreas of their dreams, and so, disregarding GTA San Andreas entirely, they set out to do just that. In true Rockstar fashion, the whole thing began with a field trip. Los Santos, San Andreas, was heavily based on Los Angeles, California, and so, cameras in hand, the team ventured out to the West Coast to fully immerse themselves in the city. They hired tour guides, captured hundreds of thousands of photographs and hundreds of hours of video, and spoke to everyone from historians to prisoners to get a feel for the place. They weren't setting out to imitate reality though. Los Santos might have been inspired by Los Angeles, but it was very much going to have its own identity. By the time it was finished, the world was absolutely huge, with art director Aaron Garbett estimating that the map was larger than those of San Andreas, 4, and Red Dead Redemption combined. Rather big then.
The old San Andreas wasn't the only thing the team decided to throw out entirely. They also chose to get rid of the single protagonist formula that had been used throughout the series after members of the development team expressed concerns that the approach might backfire.
They originally thought to tell 3 completely separate narratives, but eventually evolved the concept, making the stories of Trevor, Michael, and Franklin coalesce over the course of the game. Dan Houser said of GTA 5's plot, "We're starting to feel that it's our strongest plotted game because the characters are so intertwined. When you're advancing Michael's story, you're also advancing Trevor's story in a different way, and the meeting points are very exciting." It was the 2007 to 2008 financial crisis that formed the inspiration for the plot, which looks at how a recession caused the 3 central characters to turn back to their lives of crime. The heist theme came about due to the positive response to the GTA 4 mission 3-Leaf Clover, with Sam wanting to truly capture the thrill of the heist that he felt they hadn't quite nailed in GTA 4. Not only did the multiple protagonist angle allow Rockstar to approach storytelling in a different way, it also gave them the opportunity to shake up the gameplay somewhat. With 3 leads, they needed to evolve GTA's core gameplay, which opened up opportunities for a more tactical experience. By September 2013, GTA 5 was ready to go, and if you thought the gaming world's response to GTA 4 was phenomenal, it wasn't a patch on GTA 5's reception.
The game, admittedly, didn't do as well with critics as its predecessor, scraping a paltry average review score of 97 as opposed to GTA 4's 98. But that didn't matter to gamers, who turned out in droves to buy a copy. Within 24 hours of its release, over 11 million copies of GTA 5 had been sold worldwide, generating $815 million in revenue, and within 3 days, it had exceeded $1 billion.
Just 6 weeks after its release, it had already surpassed the lifetime sales of GTA 4 and had become the best-selling game on the PlayStation Store, even outselling tentpole exclusive The Last of Us. Oh, and remember how we said that GTA 4 broke 3 world records? Well, GTA 5 broke 7. It was the best-selling video game in 24 hours, the best-selling action-adventure game in 24 hours, the highest-grossing video game in 24 hours, the fastest entertainment property to gross $1 billion, the fastest video game to gross $1 billion, had the highest revenue generated by an entertainment product in 24 hours, and had the most viewed trailer for an action-adventure video game. Bloody hell. In true Rockstar fashion, GTA 5 was also arguably more controversial than GTA 4 as well, with the mission By the Book in particular garnering furrowed brows from the world over due to the fact that it had players participating in waterboarding, which might sound like something fun you'd do on holiday, but trust me, it is not. Critics of the scenes argued that they depicted acts that were A, far more reprehensible than anything GTA had portrayed previously, B, the close-up camera and QTEs accentuated the impact, and C, there wasn't enough context to justify the violence.
Unlike the hot coffee scandal though, the by-the-book controversy more or less blew over without incident.
The game did get pulled from some Australian shelves, however, due to its depiction of women, which some found to be highly misogynistic, and changes had to be made to the 2022 re-release due to harmful stereotypes about the trans community that were featured in the game. Usually, once a GTA was out of the door, Rockstar would immediately get to work on a follow-up, but it actually ended up being quite a while, 9 years in fact, before the company would confirm it was working on GTA 6. 9 years! What on earth were they up to? In the years following the release of Grand Theft Auto V and its online component Grand Theft Auto Online, Rockstar didn't really get up to all that much, at least launch-wise. The anniversary edition of Bully was launched on iOS and Android in 2016 with little fanfare, and a VR version of LA Noire released in 2017 to a reasonable reception, but aside from that, it was all quiet on the Rockstar Northern Front.
Rockstar hadn't been resting on their laurels though. Since the release of Red Dead Redemption, they'd been working on a sequel, and oh lord, what a sequel.
The development of Red Dead Redemption 2 began shortly after the release of its predecessor, with Rockstar co-opting all of its studios into one big mega developer consisting of more than 1,600 people. The previous game had struck such a chord with the team that they began sending in pitches to Sam & Co. outlining how a sequel might look, though it was the gang-based ideas that piqued the interest of the writers' room, who called them too compelling to turn away. Whilst RDR had focused on life after the Old West and the importance of protecting family at all costs, the writers decided to set the sequel during the Old West's decline and center the story on an outlaw gang falling apart as a result of the coming of the modern era. There might have been a solid plan in place for Red Dead Redemption 2, but trouble was brewing once again for Rockstar. Despite getting called out for it previously and having an absolutely massive team on the job, plus no real deadline by which to have the game completed, Rockstar was still subjecting developers to horrendous crunch. This was hinted at by Dan Houser, who told Vulture in 2018 that he and the writers had been working 100-hour weeks, though he quickly clarified that he only meant the writers and only on a voluntary basis and only for a short while.
Though some Rockstar employees backed up what Dan said, others refuted the claims, alleging that many employees were forced into working overtime and were only compensated by year-end bonuses that hinged on Red Dead Redemption 2's commercial performance. Multiple even reported suffering from depression as a result of working for the studio and claimed that they'd witnessed colleagues having full-on breakdowns due to how the company was treating them.
This story had something of a happy ending though. In April 2020, Jason Schreier, then of Kotaku, penned an article revealing that the backlash against Rockstar had prompted positive change. Several bigwigs, including Dan Houser, who admittedly left after a sabbatical, either stepped down or were given the boot, and a number of cultural changes were made to ensure that the staff were having a much better time whilst working for the company. They also committed to better planning, which would help to mitigate crunch, held meetings about conduct and sexual harassment, and planned to bring in a coaching organisation to help train their managers to actually, manage. One staff member said to Kotaku that Rockstar management seemed to be intent on running the company like a company, rather than the frat house they seemed to have been running it as previously. And what of Red Dead Redemption 2? It released in October 2018 to rave reviews, garnering an average score of 97 out of 100 on Metacritic, has sold more than 70 million copies to date, and won more industry awards than you could shake a horse at. Rockstar were unstoppable, their very name synonymous with quality games. I'm sure nothing, especially a ruinous remaster, could do anything to change that, right? If you've forgotten everything that we said about Grand Theft Autos 3, Vice City and San Andreas, then we can't really blame you, it has been a little while. You might recall though that upon their respective releases, despite a bit of pearl clutching from one or two folks, the trio of titles were very well received by both critics and gamers and wound up selling extremely well. By 2019, however, the three games were, for want of a better word, old. Towards the middle of the 2010s, the games industry saw a massive uptick in video game remakes and remasters, and by the end of the decade it seemed like every game and its mum, no matter how old, was getting a fresh coat of paint. Rockstar weren't keen on the idea though. They had never been ones for looking back. Quite the contrary, in fact, Rockstar had always been a company that looked to the future, eternally trying to find new ways to innovate and push the envelope with their games.
GTA 3 was coming up on its 20th anniversary though, and so prompted by a mix of nostalgia and a want to preserve their historic achievements, Rockstar took the decision to remaster 3, Vice City, and San Andreas. Instead of using one of its own studios, however, they decided to give the task of developing the remasters to Grove Street Games.
The studio wasn't new to GTA. In the early 2010s, they had developed anniversary editions of 3, Vice City, and San Andreas for mobile devices, so being familiar with the trilogy, it sort of made sense for them to take on development duties. We don't think it's unfair to say, though, that they utterly fumbled it. Naturally, they didn't set out to butcher the titles. They had hoped to bring them in line with modern games, technologically speaking, whilst trying to retain the look and feel that fans remembered. Sounds good in theory, but it would seem that the odds were stacked against them from the get-go. Remastering 3 games at once was a monumental task in and of itself, but there were further issues caused by the fact that many of the original game's assets, like the audio, textures, and character models, had been lost to time. Rockstar hadn't held onto them because they honestly thought no one would ever need them again, and so many of the assets had to be completely rebuilt. In November 2021, after 2 years of hard work from Grove Street Games, Rockstar was ready to unleash Grand Theft Auto The Trilogy, the Definitive Edition, a moniker that is, in our humble opinion, far too bloody long, upon the world, and the response was, well, it was really not very good.
For the umpteenth time, Rockstar was facing a public backlash, but it wasn't for any sex, violence, or other questionable material from within its games. They were under fire because Grand Theft Auto The Trilogy, the Definitive Edition, was crap.
The remaster got a couple of compliments from professional critics. They liked the addition of mission checkpoints, a weapon wheel, map navigation, and improved shooting, but that was about it. The combat was far too similar to that in the originals, which wasn't a good thing as it had aged roughly as well as a bottle of milk left out in the sun. Bugs, glitches, and crashes were a frequent occurrence, and don't even get us started on the character models. Look at it! What the hell is that?
Buster, straight buster.
The fans weren't best pleased either, with many of them taking to sites like Metacritic and Steam to review bomb the game. At its lowest, the collection of remakes had a user score of just 0.4 out of 10, making it one of the worst rated games by users on the entire site. This backlash forced Rockstar to issue an apology to players a little more than a week after the game's release and admit that the Definitive Edition didn't measure up to the company's usual quality standards. Take-Two, on the other hand, said that whilst the game definitely had some quality issues, it performed just great, which some took as Rockstar's parent company playing down the controversy. Whether or not this was the intent, the whole debacle led to Rockstar cancelling planned remasters of Grand Theft Auto 4 and Red Dead Redemption and choosing to focus all of their efforts on Grand Theft Auto 6 instead. Probably for the best, to be honest. It's relatively fair to say that, by the end of 2021, Rockstar were firmly in the doghouse. Thankfully though, the gaming public suffers from severe short-term memory loss, and as soon as they caught wind that a new Grand Theft Auto was in the works, the company was seemingly forgiven for its prior transgressions. For years and years, ever since the release of GTA 5 in 2013, gamers have been speculating that Rockstar were working hard on a new entry into the franchise, but for almost a decade, Sam & Co. refused to confirm or deny the rumours. And so, players continued to pump money into GTA Online by the millions and millions. But then, in February 2022, gamers got the news they had been waiting for. Grand Theft Auto 6 was officially in development.
The theorists went wild. Where would the game be set? Who would be the protagonists? And how exactly would Rockstar upset the censors this time? One thing was for sure though, it was going to be big in every sense of the word.
Unfortunately, just 7 months after the game's announcement, disaster struck. On the 18th of September 2022, 90 videos were published to GTA forums which showed around 50 minutes of gameplay footage from various stages of GTA 6's development. The videos revealed the setting, a modern-day Vice City, various animation tests and level layouts, and unveiled the player characters who were shown entering a strip club and robbing a diner. These videos weren't released by Rockstar, of course. The company had fallen victim to a hacker who claimed to have downloaded the files from Rockstar's internal Slack chat. Take-Two immediately issued a plethora of DMCA takedowns, which is why we can't show any of the leaked content here, but by then, it was too late. Thousands of fans had seen the footage. It gets worse though, because the hacker also claimed to have GTA 6's source codes, numerous assets, and the internal builds of GTA 5 and 6, and threatened to publish them. Sam and the rest of the Rockstar gang were furious. How dare someone break into their systems and reveal parts of the game before they could? Not only had this breach taken away some of Rockstar's control over their own product, but it would also have massive ramifications for their staff. After all, if their remote networks weren't secure, could they go on allowing their people to work from home? The leak also proved to be a massive PR disaster, as many who saw the leaked footage wrongly thought it to be representative of the final game, and although the press did their best to assure fans that these were early builds, not everyone got the message, with some claiming that graphics are finalized in the early stages and so that this was what GTA 6 would actually look like. Some friends of Rockstar, including Cliff Bleszinski, Neil Druckmann, Rami Ismail and Alana Pierce, came to their defense though, and even shared work-in-progress footage of their own games to prove that fans shouldn't give up on GTA 6 just yet. Meanwhile, an investigation was underway to track down the hacker, known only, initially at least, by his alias Teapot Uber Hacker. This individual claimed responsibility for the hack and for a security breach of rideshare company Uber in early September 2022. Authorities believed that they were affiliated with hacker group Lapsus, who were also thought to be responsible for cybersecurity breaches at Microsoft, Nvidia, and Samsung. On the 22nd of September 2022, just 4 days after the leak, they got him. 17-year-old Aryan Kurtaj from Oxford was unmasked and brought into police custody. It later transpired that he'd committed the hack whilst on bail for other cyber crimes and had used a mobile phone, a TV, and an Amazon Fire Stick to MacGyver his way into Rockstar's systems. On the 26th of September 2022, Kurtaj pleaded guilty to 2 counts of breaching his bail conditions, but maintained that he was not guilty of 2 counts of computer misuse. Because of the severity of his alleged crimes, though, the case was referred to a higher court, and Kurtaj was remanded in a youth detention centre.
It wasn't until mid-2023 that the case finally went to court, but unfortunately for Kurtaj, he was deemed unfit to stand trial due to his acute autism. And so, rather than trying to determine if he had committed the acts with criminal intent, the jury was simply asked to decide whether or not he had done them at all.
Their conclusion was that Kurtaj was indeed guilty of breaching Rockstar's and several other companies' systems, and due to the fact that he showed no remorse for the crimes and expressed intent to do it again, he was placed under an indefinite hospital order, meaning that, unless he can prove to doctors that he isn't a potential menace to society, he's likely to spend the rest of his life in a secure facility. By the time all of this was dealt with, Rockstar estimated the leak had cost them the best part of $5 million to sort out, not to mention the thousands of staff hours spent trying to recover the project. It had certainly put a dampener on things. As we know though, you can't keep a good Rockstar down, certainly not for long anyway, and in late 2023 the company came back with a bang. On November the 8th, Sam Houser put out a message on the Rockstar website with some fantastic news. The first trailer for Grand Theft Auto 6 would be dropping the following month. The gaming community went bonkers. Christmas was coming early, and Santa Claus was bringing one of the best presents imaginable, sorry for that pun, a first proper look at what GTA 6 would have in store. Regrettably, a low-quality version of the trailer was posted on Twitter on the 4th of December before Rockstar could release the actual one, which prompted them to release the real thing the following day. From that moment, the hype train was well and truly in town. The 91-second clip revealed the game's title, introduced protagonist Lucia and her partner in crime, confirmed Leonida, a fictional version of Florida, as the setting, and disclosed a 2025 release window.
The trailer itself was a record breaker. It got the most first-day views for a non-music video within just 12 hours, surpassing 46 million, and within 24 hours of its release, the GTA 6 trailer was the most liked video game trailer and the 3rd most viewed non-music video of all time.
At the time of writing and recording, work on GTA 6 is ongoing, though the game is thought to be in the late stages of development, and according to Take-Two, it's slated for release at some point in 2026. No matter when it actually hits shelves though, I think we can all agree it's going to be one of the biggest video game launches of all time. So, how exactly does one go from being a public school boy with a love for hip-hop music and a slightly rebellious streak to becoming one of the most influential people in all of gaming and entertainment? Well, in Sam Houser's case, it would seem like the recipe required drive, ambition, passion, a touch of arrogance, a dash of luck, a pinch of your mum and dad knowing the right people, and some very, very thick skin. Sam's story, and that of Rockstar, is not a rags-to-riches tale, that much is certain, but what is clear is that if it hadn't been for Sam Houser, the games industry might look quite different today. Would someone else have come along in his stead to push the envelope as he and his companions did? Who's to say? But it was undoubtedly Sam's approach to making games that saw the envelope not just pushed, but set on fire and thrown out of a 30th story window. Though you may not agree with some of their methods, the endless crunch, violent outbursts, and willingness to throw their fans under the bus to name but a few, it's impossible to deny that Rockstar has changed the face of gaming for the better and for good. And thanks to pushback from the very people that put money in their pockets, i.e. gamers themselves, they even managed, eventually, to make Rockstar a half-decent place to work, where some employees wouldn't patrol the hallways with shotguns and baseball bats whilst others worked themselves into oblivion.
The company might have had a couple of wobbles in recent years, but fingers crossed Rockstar have learned from their mistakes and are putting everything they've got into making Grand Theft Auto 6 a sequel that's truly worthy of its moniker. And what of Jack Thompson, you might be wondering? Well, it seems that he's more or less given up his crusade and now teaches civics classes to inmates in Florida prisons. Probably not the kind of behind bars that Sam and his crew would like, but at the very least, he's now out of their hair.